Memories are formed in the hippocampus in our brain. Within the hippocampus, there are several stores, like a filing cabinet, which store different types of memories. When first creating a memory, we start with environmental stimuli. This is just a fancy way of explaining the senses, such as audio, visual, touch, taste, and smell. These are all going straight to the sensory memory, which is a large store processing lots of senses at the same time, most of which we're not even focusing on, such as the touch of the chair you're sitting on or a clock ticking in the background. It's only once we pay attention to a specific sense that this can be transferred into the short-term memory. In the context of memorising a piece of music, first of all, we will concentrate on the music we're looking at and the sound that we're making, often ignoring all of the senses around us. Once we pay attention to these things, it gets transferred into our short-term memory, so we can work on the piece and different sections. Things only stay in our short-term memory for roughly 3 seconds, so it has a really short duration, and merely playing through a piece once is not going to help us memorise it, since it's unlikely we would even remember the first note. Short-term memory also only has a capacity of around 7 items, plus or minus 2, so in the terms of memorising a section of music, we can normally only hold around 7 notes in our short-term memory at one time. However, we can use maintenance rehearsal to remember these and transfer them into our long-term memory. Maintenance rehearsal is simply just repeating a small amount of information a lot of times to move it into our long-term memory. We can also chunk pieces of information together to make it easier to remember more in this way. For example, if we try to remember a phone number, it's often easier to remember by grouping it into large numbers rather than individual ones. You wouldn't try to remember a number such as 0, 7, 7, 0, 3. You'd remember it in 3 groups such as 07703, 343, 916. It's the same in a piece of music. It's often easier to remember small cells in a group rather than focusing on individual notes. By repeating a passage several times, it can then be transferred to the long-term memory, where the duration capacity of memories is potentially unlimited. When recalling this at a later date, the long-term memory goes through the process of retrieval back to the short-term memory to then be used. The type of memory we're trying to remember when memorising music is called procedural memory. Other types of procedural memories include trying to tie a shoelace, riding a bike, driving a car, or cooking your favourite recipe. These can only be achieved through lots of repetition and practice until eventually they become automatic actions. This especially applies to things like scales, since we practice them so often they become automatic and we don't even think about what we're doing. If we take tying a shoelace for example, it's very unlikely at our age to have to think about each individual step of tying the shoelaces together. Instead, our hands know how to automatically tie them together in a bow. Another way of rehearsing memories enough to transfer them to the long-term memory is to use the articulatory process in our phonological loop, which is part of the short-term memory. This is a very wordy way to explain this. So in more simple terms, we have an inner ear, which is based in the phonological store. This is what we would use when repeating something often in our head, such as a string of numbers. This is the same when memorising music. Either the inner ear hears the individual pitches and can remember these and repeats them so often that we know exactly what the piece should sound like, or it is more physical, such as hearing note names or imagining which fingers to use. There are lots of ways to improve our memorisation. One theory is state-dependent forgetting. Here, state refers to emotional and physical state of the body at the time. For example, a study was carried out on a group of men who were given a list of words to remember when they were drunk or sober. The study found that those who were drunk when learning and drunk at recall remembered more than the men who were drunk at learning and sober at recall. Now, this is not to say that we should be drunk when learning our pieces and drunk during our lessons and recitals whilst trying to recall them. Rather, it is the case for emotional state, often anxiety. If you are a particularly anxious person when performing, we're more likely to remember the music if we're anxious whilst learning it as well. This only has to be a small level anxiety, nothing that could mentally harm you. A better theory in our cases is probably context and cue dependent forgetting. This refers to physical cues rather than emotional ones, such as the room, items within the room, and people. So if you were going to perform the memorised piece in the recital hall, it's good to practice it in the space a few times before doing it. Also, finding specific objects within the recital hall, such as a light on the ceiling, a different coloured bit of wood on the floor, or a specific person, can help recall specific bits of the piece. You could link a specific passage to the projector, another specific passage to a light, and another bit to a certain seat in the hall. Whilst this wouldn't tell you the notes you need to play, just having that physical cue could help recall the information that you need.